I keep hearing people talk about stock markets, and what the hell is a stock market?
You know, it's a video game about collecting things and capitalism and building an island in in your own image and hanging out with friends. I can't explain what Animal Crossing is.
Is this in-game betting come to the Nintendo Switch? Is that what's happening?
It's the Sow Jones stock market.
Yeah, look, you have a resource that people want.
Yeah.
And
you exchange it for goods or services, usually goods or money, bells. You know, there's a raccoon. He has a corporate script. So you exchange your labor for the script.
He's a slumlord.
And then, he upgrades your house and doesn't tell you how much it's going to cost until you agree to do it. And then he's like, oh, by the way, here's a number with more zeros than you expected. Good luck paying this back, a-hole.
Raccoons are noted communists, so I don't believe this mythology anymore.
Look, all I know is that if I go for a walk in Golden Gate Park right now and I throw like $30 at some raccoons, those little guys are going to take it and run off, and they are not going to upgrade my house.
Look, it's Animal Crossing, not Animal Farm, okay?
Welcome to another episode of Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
And joining us today, we have a very special guest. He is my favorite science communicator. You may know him from tested.com. Kishore Hari. Welcome, Kishore.
Thanks for letting me be here. I'm excited for another 2 hours of NAS chat.
Only 2 hours this time?
3-part NAS episode. We're dedicating the entire month of April to getting NAS.
I have material for at least like 5-6 hours, maybe.
I was actually wondering if the Windows episodes would stretch into like a 7-episode miniseries. Like when the first episode ended at like Windows 95, I was like, oh no, they're only at Windows 95.
Just wait till our ranking of OS 2 Warp and we will get there for sure.
Oh man, Brad will present Ken Burns's Windows.
I would absolutely watch 10 hours of that.
I like some slow moving screenshots of different versions of Windows, like a deep, long conversation with Brian Eno about the creation of the Windows 95 sound. I'm there. I'm in for that.
Did you know they've never put the Windows 95 sound out in high quality? It's still if you go download it now, it's still the same like 22 kilohertz, like 8-bit shitty 1995 wave that they put on those CDs. I don't know. They still have to have that master recording somewhere, right?
I don't know if it's true, but I always heard that was the most expensive piece of commercial music ever made.
Yeah. Have you ever read about his creation for that? Like he has talked about how like he was in a creative rut with the stuff he was doing commercially. And then they were like, hey, make a 3-second piece of music. And he said he made like 80 something different ones. And working in that tiny little time slice actually like broke him out of the rut that he had been in.
Constraints, man.
Yeah.
Constraints.
Yeah. Speaking of constraints.
Yeah, so Kishore's here to answer. This is our monthly Q&A episode.
Yeah,
and we invited Kishore here because we have questions, but I know a lot of folks in the audience also have questions because the COVID-19/coronavirus, whatever your designation of choice is changing the way we live our lives on the day to day right now. I think this is my 18th day. No, this is my 20th day.
Wow.
My 21st is tomorrow.
You guys just doing the remote grocery shopping?
We're doing remote grocery shopping. We're doing all that stuff. And we go on walks because I would be insane if I wasn't going on walks. But yeah, like social distancing is real. A lot of places, we're all in shelter in place in California, Colorado, New York, a bunch of other places are similar. And we wanted to ask you some questions, and we want to get somebody in who's a science person who can answer questions from a science perspective and is paying attention to research and what the doctors are saying and stuff like that.
I'm happy to. I'm on day 24, so I'm just excited that another human being that isn't my wife or child is talking to me directly.
So I guess the first thing, Spencer sent in a question. He says, Kishore, I was wondering what you think about how long the COVID-19 pandemic will last. Is this going to be a seasonal thing like the cold or the flu? Are we going to keep doing this every 6 months forever?
So I'm going to start by saying I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not like an expert in this. And all I'm going to do is try to represent some of the things I'm hearing from a lot of experts online. So the first thing is we have no idea. I think it's important to remember that this virus came into human like eyesight, like that this thing even exists in mid-December. And we're like 3 months later at this point. So even though it's from this family of coronaviruses, and we have some past information on how long those have persisted when they've breaking out, we don't have enough to like really understand where this is going to go. That being said, the best guesses based off of how previous coronaviruses, and especially SARS, which broke out in the late 2000s, how long they lasted. The numbers I'm hearing is that this will be a 12 to 18 month cycle for us, where it'll be a presence in our lives. And that number comes from sort of two areas. One, they really want to understand if this is going to be seasonal or not. Like, will warmer weather tend to decrease the number of infections, higher humidity? There's a couple studies that indicated the transmission rate, the R0 factor, and I'll get into what that is later, is lower in humid and hotter places. That's not really substantiated at this point, but there's some early evidence of that. A lot of coronaviruses like colds tend to go down in summer months, but we don't know if that's mostly because people are outside and away from like crowded places versus winter months when you're just like all sitting around a fire. So there might be this sort of like lag, but then in the fall and winter, when it gets cold again, we will probably see a resurgence. And 12 to 18 months is the number that's thrown out, is because that's how long it's going to take from where we are to develop a treatment or a vaccine. And it's important to note that even though those are the numbers quoted for how long it'll take to create a vaccine based off of, a number of like phases of that research, we have never made a vaccine for a coronavirus, any kind of coronavirus in human history. So we don't even know if we can do it, let alone actually deliver it in 12 to 18 months. I'm sort of my own mentality based off of like what other people are saying is like, I'm expecting this to go on for about a year, like where it's going to be a present thing that we're going to have to actively think about.
The shelter in place and the communal.
Not necessarily the shelter in place, but like the idea of that we're going to have to be thinking about this when we make decisions in our lives. Like when we make decisions about travel, when we're making decisions about like how we go to large gatherings, all those kinds of things. It's going to be omnipresent as a thing that exists for that long. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's much less than that. But that's the kind of word that I'm hearing from a lot of science.
Do you have a good sense of what maybe sort of daily life looks like once we enter that next phase where people are starting to emerge from their homes a little bit? I'm trying to like picture, what's the average person's thought process at that point when you're contemplating like, is it time to fly somewhere for a vacation yet? Or, should I go to this wedding? How do I... Right.
I mean, you should not go to that wedding because they're going to still play the bad music that they were going to play before. So it's not worth it.
Oh, weddings can be... I
literally got an invitation to a wedding in like early August, and I was like,
"Oh boy, that's
really?
ambitious."
Really, yeah. This feels ambitious, right?
Well, we kind of said the same thing when GDC got scheduled for the first week of August, and we thought that seems maybe premature. We'll see.
Yeah, but there's both good answers and not good answers. Like a part of this is not like science question, like about what to merge. It's like it has to do a lot with the decisions we make as a society. Right now here in the US, there's a lot of framing of the problem as like health versus the economy. Like we have to go back out because we have to like restart the economy. There's a lot of people that are suffering because they don't have income right now. I think that's kind of a false choice. I think like until we address some of the systemic issues around the public health issue, it's really hard to even talk about starting the economy again. I think going like the idea of like what this is going to look like, though, there's a ton of historical data of how other cultures and societies have dealt with this over a long period of time. And there's this amazing set of literature that includes stuff that's happened in the US. It's been like 50 years, but it's happened and we've gone through it before. My favorite story is I read this book called American Pandemic. that related what happened in 1918 with the Spanish flu in the U.S. And that was a devastating disease. I think 750,000 Americans died during that. And we think, tens of millions died worldwide. But what was interesting is we all live in the Bay Area, and in San Francisco, they actually passed an ordinance that you had to wear fabric masks out in public to prevent the spread of flu. And that was a law that was being enforced by police officers at the time. And it had a fine attached to it. And there's this group of people in San Francisco that rebelled against the idea because they're like, we're Americans. We don't wear masks here. And they formed the Anti-Mask League of San Francisco and started protesting. And they would go to places and take off their mask in a show of support. But all of this to say is like, if we get to the point where in order to go to like the grocery store or to send our kids to school, that we're going to like wear masks when we walk down the street, which is not uncommon right now in Asian cultures, like even before this pandemic happened. Is that a thing that society is going to do to kind of adapt us to consider like what it looks like to emerge from this? It's like, well, we've gone through it before. I think part of what we have to do to get there is just remember what's been done. And there's like a wealth of information that the WHO, our CDC, a ton of historians have put together on like what it takes to actually go through the next step. And part of, I think, what the next month or so in the U.S. is going to look like in terms of just dealing with what's happening, the crisis is happening, is starting to socialize those things. Because I do think what we're going to have to see is temperature checks in places so that we can identify people and get them sent to like fever clinics and essentially get isolated and quarantined. And we're going to have to see people wear masks in public. I think that's where we're going to end up. And we're going to have
sanitizer on every front door, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to finally see men wash their hands when they go to public bathrooms, like, crazy things.
I have to say, being a little bit of a germaphobe has been kind of giving me a little bit of a leg up on this because a lot of that stuff is stuff that I'm doing anyway. But do you guys want to talk about the grocery issue? Because I feel like that has gotten a fair amount of discussion.
Have either of you gone to a grocery store yet?
I went to one. My last time in a grocery store was about a week ago last Sunday.
And what was it like?
At that time, so that was, I would say that was early enough in the kind of public consciousness about this thing that it wasn't completely insane yet. Although like there was a line when I went there at first thing in the morning when they opened. But my girlfriend went to a store yesterday and then another one today, and what she described is absolutely nothing like it was a week and a half ago, because one of them was a Trader Joe's and another one was a Smart & Final, which is a little bit more of a Costco kind of bulk-ish store. But both of them were very methodically lining people up outside. She said the Trader Joe's had marks on the asphalt for 6 foot, like here's where you stand in line. Both practicing like a 1 in, 1 out policy, waiting for somebody to come out before they let the next person in. A lot of limits on number of items, like 1 per person for most things. So it's getting very regimented out there from the sound of it in the kind of the store experience.
Well, and I mean, that brings up one of my big questions, which is, what does this do to the supply chain for we all know that like you can't get VR headsets and you can't get Nintendo Switches and you can't get Ring Fit Adventure right now. But I'm worried about like potatoes, right? Like what's happening with food production and our supply chain for that stuff? Are we out of toilet paper? Are we not going to have toilet paper until this is over? Or we need to explore alternative methods?
So there's like a few questions wrapped up there. So I think first on the grocery stores, that actually sounds like the best Trader Joe's experience I could imagine in the past few years. Like normally going to Trader Joe's is a disaster. So that sounds not as bad. I'll say I think going to the grocery store is going to become a more regimented process for the next couple months, because even if we get to the point, let's say in San Francisco, where we get to 0 cases somehow, like in a month or 2 or however long it takes, are you still going to feel comfortable going to the grocery store the way Trader Joe's used to be, where people are crowded everywhere, just like, kind of anything goes? Probably not. So there's probably going to be some middle space between what you saw with the regimen and what it's going to be. In terms of the supply chain, well, let's start with toilet paper. So toilet paper is made in America. Yeah, America. And they perfected the supply chain to essentially like toilet paper. Like there's no reasons Americans like suddenly shit more. It's not like we're all going to like Chick-fil-A or something like massively and like we're all having group diarrhea. And so like the toilet paper usage in the country is really stable. And so they've actually perfected the supply chain to have like just in time delivery, which I love the just in time because that's what like Apple and other tech companies are using right now for their process. So we're still producing the amount of toilet paper the country needs and nothing has changed that. So it's the hoarding that has led to the decline in the amount of toilet paper. But, you know, within a few weeks, we're going to see that. So I have a good friend of mine lives in Singapore and I was we had a call the other night and I was like, did you have a run on toilet paper? Is that like a uniquely American thing? He's like, no, we had a run on toilet paper, too. So it's not just us, if that makes you feel better. But usually the supply catches up in a couple weeks. And I know a lot of toilet paper manufacturers were trying to increase supply, but they had basically designed their process being like, you know, Americans are going to use the same amount of toilet paper. Like we don't have all this extra capacity. So it's just going to take a little while. Food is interesting. Like we live in California, which produces 40% of the produce and fruit that the country makes. So we're probably not going to see supply disruptions in like normal staples, but stuff that might be imported from like blueberries from Chile. I don't know. I think stuff that's like between Mexico and Canada, just in the Americas, I don't think we're going to see major disruptions in that. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see disruptions from stuff that's manufactured from other continents. I haven't seen a lot of good information on that because, like, again, we're not really like eating more than we were a week ago. We might be eating more at home, but there isn't really like a major change in consumption pattern. So I think the supply, from what I understand, for most things in our life, like bread, milk, butter, produce, is not going to be disrupted. But I think it's like certain fruits and vegetables. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a supply disruption.
What? I mean, I guess all of this, you know, the ghoulish right is now talking about, and just to be clear, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon about 4:30. So things can change dramatically on a minute by minute basis. Each day seems like about 10 years sometimes. You know, there's been a lot of talk about reopening businesses and calling off the shelters in places and the social distancing, relaxing the social distancing in time for Easter, I think was the date I saw. That seems irresponsible to dangerous from where I sit. Does that seem right to you, Keish?
I mean, I need my Easter chocolate. I don't know what you're thinking about. Like, I think it's important for us to have a nationwide Easter egg hunt.
Sacrifices have to be made. Look,
I have 75 bags of mini eggs in the closet. I can hold out for years.
Hey, we've got 42 rolls of toilet paper. You want to trade?
I can give you a bag. Yeah,
we'll have
42
the ratio is.
We went to Costco a couple months ago. It just happened, you know, as these things do.
What you don't see off camera in Brad's house is just walls and walls of toilet paper.
I swear to God, we're not hoarding. This was completely coincidental. Uh-huh. We just stocked up it back around Christmas.
Now I'm just thinking about Brad's on eBay, like selling a roll at a time.
It's really not that much. It's just
42 rolls. That is a lot.
It's 7 packs of 6. You know, they sell in bulk there. It turns out.
I didn't realize you could teach multiplication tables with toilet paper. It's going to like revamp the educational system here. Now I've completely forgotten the question. What the hell were we talking about?
Easter. Are we going to be
Easter.
back on for Easter?
Yeah. So
the irresponsibility.
I think the one thing that I've adapted to pretty quickly is that while you'll hear like the U.S. has this many cases or the U.S. has this many people in hospitals, like we can't talk about the United States anymore as one entity when it comes to managing this disease, because what's happening in San Francisco is not the same as what's happening in New York and what's happening in Georgia or what's happening in North Dakota, et cetera. So I imagine there's situations where things are much more under control in certain places where they can ease certain restrictions. I would be shocked just personally if Easter was the date that those things will be under control, because the CDC this afternoon came out with a report indicating that of the, I think when we're recording this, there's 81,000 or 82,000 confirmed cases in the US. And we think it's a lot more than that. Of those, they don't know where 97% of them came from, which is a problem for epidemiology. So if you're basically saying, like, is it safe for me to go outside in San Francisco? And you're like, well, we don't know where 97% of the cases here came from. So we have no idea if it's under control or not, because we haven't tested every single person. That, I think, gives you a lot of pause if you're a public health official, being like, should we kind of like open things up by Easter? And it's hard to imagine, given where we are, that we'll get there in a week. This seems like something that's going to take, a month or longer to get a handle on that. I think there's a lot of projections out there that the governors have about when certain peaks are going to hit in certain states. I've read that in New York, they're expecting a peak in 3 to 4 weeks, but that is just a wild guess. Right now in California, it's like 2 to 3 weeks. Seattle, we're seeing some encouraging signs, but we don't know. It's this feeling we're on this exponential curve. And the thing about being on an exponential curve is, even when it starts to slow down, the data doesn't show you that it's slowing down. And it certainly doesn't feel like it's slowing down until well after it slows down. So even if we see tomorrow in the data that things are slowing down, we're not going to feel that for another 2 weeks. So
that seems I'm sorry. Does that seem like one of the challenges of this virus in particular, with communicating to the public, especially people who aren't like very tuned into this stuff, because the incubation period is so long, because it takes so long for people to show symptoms, because the illnesses are so lengthy? Like, everything is on a delayed reaction, right? Like, policy that goes into effect, you don't see the effects of for days to weeks, right? And like, people have time to forget things in that window. People have time to be misled by misinformation. Like, is that one of the big challenges of like educating the public?
I think it starts with just like the exponential growth of this. Like, there was a lot of complacency early on when it's like there's only 15 cases and suddenly there's only 50 cases. And how quickly that ramped to, we're going to be past 100,000 cases by this weekend, I would sort of guess. So I think even wrapping your head around that kind of thinking, where like humans aren't used to that kind of thinking, first and foremost. Then I think there's numbers coming out that I don't even know what to do with, like the 3.3 million jobless claim that were reported this morning. That's 5 times the highest number that we've ever seen in American history. So I think there's a lot of stuff coming at people that they've never seen in their lifetimes, and it's going to be hard to process. So yeah, I think the number one challenge is conveying a lot of uncertainty right now to people, because I think one of the most dangerous things is a false sense of security, that we have things under control when it's legitimately not. Because the worst thing that I think can happen, and Anthony Fauci keeps saying this, is if we reopen aspects of the economy or society or lift these things and we see a massive surge in cases all of a sudden because we didn't have it under control. The kind of damage that does psychologically to people's mental health, to the trust in the institutions to run this, that'll reverberate for decades.
Well, and I mean, the argument of, hey, we have to make some sacrifices and go back to work, that's great. But if we end up with millions of people dead as a result of that, that's going to cause just as much damage to the economy as we've already done right now. It isn't like we're just turning the key and everything starts back up and we're back where we were a month ago.
No, and we're seeing that in China. Like, there's reports coming out of China about what it's looking like for them to restart their economy. And to get a sense of that, there are these pictures people are posting on like the Beijing subway lines and like Beijing streets, and looking what traffic looks like. Traffic is like an awesome proxy for like certain kind of economic activity. And Beijing does not look like Beijing. And you have to remember, like, Beijing wasn't in like Hubei province. It wasn't the epicenter of this. And we're still seeing it very slow ramp up. Like, this is not going to be like you said, Will, like turn the key and we're back fired up. This is going to take a long time.
How are we doing on testing? I know, that I've seen numbers that range from, we think that they're probably anywhere from 2 or 3 to 10 times as many people as we've confirmed with the virus as have it actually out in the wild. So that means we could be looking at 1 million people that have this later this week. What's I don't know that I trust the administration to give accurate testing numbers at this point, but I know that there are people tracking the actual tests and the test results, and we're starting to see some real movement on that here in the US.
Yeah, so I think the best site I've seen in terms of reporting data is covidtracking.com, because it lists state level information as it comes available, and it's connected to county level health sites. Alexis Madrigal from the Atlantic and a few other people are working behind the scenes on sort of updating this. So yesterday to today, we saw 100,000 tests in the US. And we have a total of 520,000 tests. So that means like 20% of, the tests in the US have happened in the last day. So we're seeing like a very significant ramp up in number of tests right now. But that isn't evenly spread across the states. Like we're seeing most of that ramp in like New York and Washington State and a few other places. So the question of like testing ramping up, we're seeing like the increase of testing, but that testing has to just ramp up everywhere. And we're not there yet. And then the second thing is the test that exists right now is something called a qPCR test. What it does is it looks for the viral RNA and amplifies it and tries to like match it against what the known gene sequence is. And that test usually takes like a day. It can take a little less time. It can definitely take longer. But the real test we want is something called a serological test. It's an antibody test. It's a blood test where we look for hallmarks of immune response to it, because then we can also not just understand who is infected, but who has already had it and maybe has developed immunity. I know of one FDA certified serological test that's out of the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York right now. But we have not scaled that. That test is a lot faster than the PCR test. And when you see that test ramping up and start to get out places, I'll look to that as a really good indicator that we have testing and thinking under control. Because as soon as like we have an understanding of antibody tests, we can make some like better projections on where this is going and where it's been.
I've seen a couple of companies, I'm not super familiar with them, but both claim that they're working on home tests that are kind of sold through retail to the average person. Do you have any thoughts on A, like the efficacy of those, and B, like what role those would play in kind of tracking and keeping the data straight for this stuff?
Yeah. I mean, this is not like, I think this is fractured. We should discuss this. So I'm morally repellent to for-profit testing in a public health emergency. And like, that's my initial reaction to home testing kits is like, if we are charging people money to do this, like we're creating these like massive inequities of who can actually take a test and not. It is like the exact same feeling I felt when I was like, how the hell did Kevin Durant get a test when he has no symptoms? It's that kind of feeling. So I find it repellent in that way. But I think what you just said, Brad, like is my deeper concern is like, okay, so this company is going to collect data. How are they going to share that data with all of the other sources, and who's going to aggregate that? We're already seeing like state public health agencies way underwater in terms of their capacity. So if there's like a robust plan for transparently managing and collating and assembling that data, making it interoperable, I like that sounds awesome to me then. That we can do some at-home testing, because we have to test the asymptomatic population to figure out how much of this virus is to make some choices for the future. But I haven't heard any of those home testing kit companies talk about that stuff. They're all like, you can just swab your thing and you'll get results this fast. To me, that's like that isn't useful until that back end is filled in. Maybe some of those companies have done that, and I'd love to hear that if that's true.
This is a more basic question, but do we like how much clarity do we have on the actual timeline for the disease? I know we have pretty good data for after people show up at the hospital and are sick, and we know that we're looking at, people either get better or they get worse, and in the next 5 to 10 days, and then they're going to be in the hospital for 3 months if they're lucky. But like how Is that 5 to 14 day incubation period pretty locked in? Do we know when people are contagious in that time period, or is that all that stuff still up in the air at this point?
We don't, and there's a lot of differing studies that have come out to this effect. So we've seen like wildly different incubation periods, and like the process of the going from asymptomatic to symptomatic varies by age, varies by underlying conditions. So there isn't this like, here's how long it takes. We're seeing a very different number in Germany than what we're seeing in areas that are like more healthcare impacted, like New York right now. So there isn't an easy answer to this. So as far as we know, like once you essentially start to have symptoms of the disease, it initially starts in the top of your lungs, and like there's an immune response there, and that immune response creates this almost kind of like sloughing of cells that take the virus deeper into your lungs, and that's where you tend to develop like these like really gnarly pneumonias. And we've seen that happen. I'll back up and say, for a lot of people, when that happens, they have to go on ventilators to breathe for them because the immune response gets out of control and they just can't breathe for themselves. We've seen some indications from the fact of how healthcare workers have gotten sick that there seems to be an acceleration with those healthcare workers. So there's some thinking that like there's a dosage kind of component to here, like how much virus you get exposed to, it like changes the trajectory of how fast it incubates within you.
Wow.
So that's like a short, like a long way of saying like we don't know what the incubation period is, but we do have an idea of like the range is in this like 5 to 14 day, and that's been pretty well backed up. And in fact, it's probably shorter than that. Like the latest study I read had it at had 8 days about, but because there's asymptomatic times in this, how it travels through different age ranges and populations, they're essentially like creating a larger window for people to isolate to just kill off all the vectors for the disease to spread. I have not created a very optimistic view of where we are with this virus yet. I'll get to happier news soon.
We're just over here
depending on the questions.
right
Yeah,
now.
I was definitely a little shell-shocked after that answer for sure. But I don't know. So Will sent around this article that's on Serious Eats that I think is probably just aggregating a lot of existing research that's been coming out about best practices around handling groceries and cleaning groceries and touching contaminated surfaces and what it's like to eat the virus, on food. And I'll say that like reading
Tastes
through that
like
right
chicken,
before this.
I heard.
Yeah, totally. It's a delicacy. I'll say that reading through that right before this made me feel like mildly encouraged that food, like the foodborne pathway is not the vector that I thought it might be for transmitting this thing. That like, I basically just wanted to talk about some sort of best practices around how to handle groceries and what you should be doing there. Cause there are some videos going viral about that stuff now. So
yeah, I mean, we should talk about this article really quickly. So I'm going to go out there and call it friend of the pod. Kenji Lopez wrote this article, and he worked with a food scientist. And what they did is they looked at like the patterns of foodborne illness outbreaks and compared it to what we're seeing in the data right now for COVID-19. And they don't seem to share any commonalities. Like in many countries, we don't see an outbreak where it's like where the tracing goes back to this restaurant. And because it doesn't have that hallmark, and that there's a broad implication that this is transmitted by droplets, they don't think like foodborne vector is kind of a dangerous one. So even if somebody coughs into your food, the likelihood that you eat that and get the virus seems to be low based on what we know now. That might change later, but you'd have to have somebody cough in your food. You take that food and kind of like smear it along your face, and then you can increase your risk for it. Because even the ways this translates or droplet is the number one way, and that's largely confirmed. Then there's something called smear, which is where you're infected with the virus, you touch a surface, then somebody else comes along and touches that surface, and then like touches their face, mostly nose and eyes, and sometimes mouth. And then there's the really delightful one, fecal oral transmission.
I saw an article about this.
Yeah, and there is some indication there is fecal oral transmission, and there was a preprint out yesterday that indicated that the virus persists in your stool longer than the symptoms persist within you. So you could still be passing by poop like well after you get better.
Noted.
Wow.
That being said, don't eat poop. I'm going to come down hard on that.
Okay, if you say so.
So, like, I read that Serious Eats article and looked at other information. I feel pretty good about delivery and takeout. Given that, I feel like fairly reassured if I take like reasonable steps. Like like when I get takeout and delivery, I transfer that stuff to another, to a plate instead of eating directly out of the container. So I'm not touching a surface somebody else may have touched. I wash my hands before and after dinner. And then if I get food, I reheat it because the virus is inactivated above like 165 degrees.
Does that mean I can steam packages and they'll be clean?
Are you going to steam like a cardboard pizza box? I'm kind of curious how that will work.
Like, I would steam an Amazon package though. I would. It's way easier than doing the bleach thing on them. I guess that's the follow up to this. Is what do you do? Like, if takeout food is like, you have to worry about the containers probably, but not necessarily the food, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not coming down hard and fast on this because, again, like, things are changing, but we just don't see the hallmarks of it at this point. So I'll just tell you what I do. Like, we've gotten takeout from a lot of places and like fairly often because there's a lot of like businesses where I live in San Francisco that I have a vested interest in that restaurant surviving because I like the food there. And like those people need jobs, they need support, and it's important. And so if I can take some precautions, so like when we get pizza, we'll usually like transfer the pizza, out of the cardboard onto a plate. And then we might like nuke it or fry it to like crisp up the bottom. But that's just because that makes the pizza taste better. And then when we like handle the cardboard, we'll usually wash our hands before and after. But I'm not like steaming it and like hardcore like bleaching cardboard. I know there's people that leave like cardboard in isolation for a day. I mean, like, that's safe. My like argument against that is less about the disease and more about like, is that the way I'm going to live for the next 12 to 18 months? Like, God. That's what worries me about like kind of how people are approaching like food is like, once we establish like a level of safety, you have to think like, am I going to keep up this habit for the next year? Like anytime like food comes into my house. And so some of the stuff is like just way over the top for me from that perspective.
Yeah, so that's actually kind of what I wanted to get at, because packaged goods like from the grocery store are the thing that concerned me a little more, because they pass through a lot of hands just in the process of being sold and stocked. And also, people wander stores and pick up stuff and look at it and put it back.
Yeah, we should stop that as a society. And that is not even like a coronavirus thing. Like, we should just stop that. That's gross.
So like talking about keeping up those habits is perfectly illustrates this problem, because last week when I went to the store, I came home and washed everything I bought in the sink with soapy water. And as of like yesterday, we're already getting a little more lax about, like, in fact, quite a bit more lax about that stuff. And I don't know how worried I should be about that specific transmission vector.
I wash my produce.
Yeah.
I like any bags I bring in that like held all those groceries for a while. I wash my hands after touching it. Like, we've put our cloth bags in the wash just to wash them. But I think what's important is like, I only go to the grocery store like once a week right now, and just like kind of get, and like, that's the actual vector I'm more concerned about is people. It's not the food. Like I think there's and I'm just speaking personally here, I think there's so much more of a risk being within a foot or two of another person and them coughing and sneezing near you than somebody handling a package at a grocery store, and then you not being careful. The important thing here is the hand washing after you like touch all of that kind of stuff, and also cooking your food. Like, also, like, if you're doing all those things, like, the virus doesn't really stand a chance. It doesn't say that like you won't get infected that way, but your likelihood goes so far down. And so I saw a video today, I think, Will, you posted this, where this guy was like taking like techniques from like the surgical theater on hand washing.
Yeah, it was bananas.
I was like, no one does this in the world.
Okay, so that is exactly the video I watched right before we came in here that had me a little spooked because we're not really going that far. So you're saying that is not necessarily required?
We don't see this in other cultures. Like we should be looking at, hey, Singapore like has managed to really tamp down on their cases. What did they do? Did they like UV C light disinfect everything that has come into their house? Like, no, they basically limited human contact. They instituted a lot of temperature checks. They created a lot of infrastructure that if you're sick, that you go to a specific place and you don't contaminate each other. They collected a lot of data for the people that are sick on who they've come in contact with, and then went and talked to all those people that they were in contact with and made sure they weren't sick. Like, those are the things that we should be worried about. Oh, and then people wash their hands. Like that's the kind of stuff that we want to see infrastructure around to tamp down on this. Because the other thing is, like, this is still America. Like, people aren't going to follow the rules. Like, so
help us.
No, but you know what? But that's like public health experts account for that. They're like, you aren't going to get 100% adherence to all this stuff. But the difference between 75 and 80% or 40% is like literally counted in number of lives saved.
I think we got through most of our questions. Brad, do you have any more? Are you feeling good?
Pretty much covers everything. I
got one more.
Okay.
Can we talk about making your own personal protective gear and what works and what doesn't?
Sure. So let's just talk about masks, because that's the easiest one. Like, if you're making like, full on hazmat suits at home and you have like the workshop for that, like, more power to you. But I think that's more cosplay than personal protective gear at this point. But like, I think what most people are talking about is some sort of fabric mask that covers their mouth. And like, the guidelines from the CDC have been, if you're sick, you should wear a mask, because that prevents the transmission spread to other people.
Stopping the droplets.
Yeah. The concern about, healthy people wearing these things is that it lulls them into a false sense of security when they go out to places where other people are, and they take risky behavior. And because those things need to be like sealed and worn properly, and you can't have like a beard on underneath these things to have the proper seal, they don't want people to think, I have a mask on, I'm safe. Let's go to the Post Malone concert now. Which like people shouldn't be doing anyways. Like, I'm fine taking like an anti-Post Malone stance on this podcast, right? I don't know about mumble rap just as a whole genre. I'm just going to be out there and say it.
Hey, look, it's time for us all to come together as a society. Let's not be drawing lines.
So let's tear down that wall, sir.
So I kind of think there's a lot of good evidence with SARS, the OG SARS, that there are a lot of like papers that came out that said wearing any kind of fabric mask reduced transmission rate when you wore them in public and you wore them consistently. Now, it's not this like rock solid evidence, and it's combined with the fact that people were taking other precautions, like washing their hands frequently and not going to these large gatherings and whatnot. But I think there's some evidence that we should be wearing masks in public, especially in like the short middle term, like over the summer, because as long as we don't use it as a security measure, if we're using it as like we're kind of taking care of each other, this is a sign to you in the grocery store that I'm thinking about this. I have thought about this, and I'm going to act in a certain way. I think that as a social cue is actually kind of interesting for us to look at. Designing
it's like condom use, but for your face.
I'm not comfortable with that analogy for so many reasons. So I think in terms of making your own at home, I think if you're making it with that sign of, I'm going to present a social cue when I go outside, that I've thought a lot about this, that I'm watching my behavior and whatnot, and there's some evidence that it potentially reduces risk, I think those are all good things. But there's a difference between that and like buying up supply for N95 respirators that, people, healthcare workers need right now and are in short supply. So if you like sew your own, or if you have like a mask or two for your family, I think that's great. And I'm kind of behind that. But you should not have it be anything more than this is like an extra step that I'm taking. It's not going to protect me directly in the same way that like washing my hands does. Can I ask y'all a question?
Sure.
Of course.
So I'm on like 6 to 7 hours of Zoom calls a day now, just because of that. Like, that's how work goes. And my cat is on like 3 or 4 of those hours of calls, like just joins me. But I'm wondering, is there like a piece of gear that you feel like is really essential in this time when everyone's on video chat? Like, should I invest in a good camera, or should I invest in better audio, or should I invest in like a green screen so I can demonstrate all the funky places that I can be with virtual backgrounds? Or is there something else completely?
I have to put somebody on blast real fast that I took a meeting last week where somebody made their background a shot of our office. And it was incredible.
Wow.
And it fooled everybody. Everybody else in the meeting was like, dude, why are you in the office? What the hell are you doing? This is incredibly irresponsible. And yeah, so yes, the potential for tomfoolery in this context, high.
Well, so, okay. In terms of things to buy in which order, the good microphone is number one, because there's nothing worse than having a voice call with you already have a good microphone, which it's in the frame of the shot that I can see right now. But yeah, like buying a $50 blue snowball is going to make your voice call game, your video call game so much better. You're going to not sound like you're screaming from across the room. And it's not going to pick up when your kid stomps down the hall or the dog barks or whatever. The webcam is, I find that most laptops have pretty good webcams these days. If it doesn't, like there's some Dells where they put the camera down on the keyboard side of the monitor instead of on the top side of the monitor, because they wanted edge to edge glass on the top. And like that thing's unusable, because all you see when you're video conferencing with somebody with one of those things is just their knuckles, right? I feel like a green screen, like you can get a pop-up green screen for maybe 30 to $50 usually on Amazon. I bet they're all gone now, but or alternately you can just get a piece of green fabric and tack it up on the wall behind you, do all sorts of goofy stuff with that. But I feel like the mic is the important thing more than anything else.
Does it matter if you get like a condenser mic with like XLR, or can you just get like a USB mic and that's like 99% of the way?
Yeah, I think it's in the acoustics of the mic that matter, like how it's getting sound into the computer. In fact, like USB is digital, so it's just going to carry that signal in there without any nasty interference that you might pick up with analog stuff. So yeah, I think something like a Blue Yeti is going to be totally fine.
He's buzz marketing brands now. Look out.
They're not paying us, I promise.
They're not paying us, yeah. So the one caveat to the buying the big microphone, you want XLR if you want to have multiple people feeding information to the same computer. If you're just listening to one person at a time, USB is fine. If you're using a microphone that has a bigger sweet spot, like the Snowball, I think goes from a cardioid, which is like it looks like a speech bubble, kind of like in a comic.
It's a butt.
Yeah, it looks like butt is a good analogy. It has an Omni setting, so you want to make sure you put it on the cardioid setting if you have it. Make that sweet spot, and then put your face into the sweet spot when you're talking. And for a better mic, if you're not using one built into a device or a webcam, you're going to want to put headphones on, because their noise canceling won't be as good, and you don't want the people on the call to hear themselves back from your microphone, because that is the ultimate. Look, we have. I'm sure you know Kishore, because you have a son that's school age, but like we do morning Zoom calls with an entire first grade class, and it is both the cutest version of video conference bingo, where like, oh, I can't hear you. I think you must be muted, Jimmy. Or, oh, somebody just disappeared. I wonder if their power went. Yep. Sorry, I was gone for a minute there. I had to go get a power brick, and you're muted. You're not muted. We can hear your dog. Please mute John. And
getting about 5 minutes of actual school done per call, probably.
Look, it's the teaching kids. We don't pay teachers anywhere near enough money is the big TLDR for me of the coronavirus so far.
Look, both of you know this coming from video games, but I quickly told my son, I'm like, we're going to learn push to talk features in these so that you stay muted. And he's like, what is PTT? I'm like, we're going to have a really big talk about this. And so when I learned like things like Zoom are like, you can hold the spacebar down and stay muted, like it's changed like group calls for me. I feel like that's like the piece of etiquette that I want to see more people get on board with.
We need a big etiquette piece for sure. I'm also doing like the other thing that's helping me with the stay at home a lot is doing fitness stuff. So I'm doing a lot more Beat Saber and pistol whip and going on walks just because I'm not getting as much outdoor activity as I normally do. And like 30 minutes in Beat Saber gets the heart going and gets me real sweaty and good. And it's fun. And like, it doesn't feel like working, but it is. So, like I find that kind of stuff to be really good. I know the Ring Fit thing for Switch is really popular with people, but I think it's impossible to find now.
I mean, you can't even find a Switch now.
Yeah. And then there's other stuff too. There's like yoga.
Yeah, we have Ring Fit. My kid has like doubled up the number of levels I'm on, and he just makes me feel like just out of shape, which I am, but I don't need to be reminded by my 9-year-old about.
You don't need it. Yeah.
But I feel like the Ring Fit adventure is like more valuable than toilet paper right now. So I'm like considering the nefarious things that I can do with my Ring Fit adventure.
Well, you are also living new content, by the way. You are also living that bidet life these days, Kishore. So
I love it. I will never go back. It has changed my life. I will tell you, like, so we have a 3-person household, 2 adults and 1 9-year-old. Our toilet paper usage, depending on the time of the month, you can infer what that means, is about a half roll a week with the bidet.
Wow.
So I'm good on toilet paper with a normal supply until I think the Star Trek universe begins. I did some math. I think I'm out to like 2,300 or something like that. Pretty good.
Brad's toilet paper could hold you until you get 800 years or something. If my math checks out on that,
lifetime supply easily at that point.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I think we've even missed the curve on bidet availability. Bidet-lability. Trying to make that one happen.
I do have one warning for listeners: is like the low end bidets. Like if you see a bidet that costs less than $100, do not buy it. It's going to do really bad things to sensitive places. So that's good.
Well, it's just cold water, Keish. You gotta man up at some point. You gotta just you take that bracing, refreshing spray right into the most delicate parts, and
they call it Poseidon's kiss, right?
Yeah. It turns out pressure valves are important pieces of technology.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can imagine the destructive potential of a cheap bidet is probably pretty high.
Oh man, I have an emergency $30 bidet in my garage just in case we run out of toilet paper. I'm thinking twice now. Do you want to do some regular questions? Do you have time to hang out for a bit, Keish, or you got to roll on? First question comes from Jeff. He says, "Hey guys, I've been needing to replace my router for a while as part of general upgrading of tech in my house. I'm hoping you could offer some advice. I use a lot of Ethernet cables that I've strung through the walls and crawl spaces, and it turns out I'd need a router with a minimum of 6 or maybe even 8 ports, along with providing a good Wi-Fi signal. Any advice on where to start looking?" So this is tricky, right? We're getting new Wi-Fi right now. So Wi-Fi 6, whatever, I can't remember, AX, I think is what it was going to be called.
Yes.
Is rolling out now. So it's maybe not the best time to upgrade all of your routers. The other thing is, I kind of get the feeling from reading this email that maybe Jeff doesn't know about network switches.
Yes,
which is an important part of this whole thing.
Because you don't need to worry about a router having a bunch of ports in it. You just need to connect it from one port to a big switch and connect everything else to that.
Well, and that's a really good solution, because it means that if you need more capacity at some point, you don't have to replace the router to add more network ports. You can just replace the switch, or even put another, daisy chain another switch. There's no performance penalty. All of there's a tiny performance penalty if you're doing really specific, really heavy loads for a home. But for the most part, if you plug your router into a switch and then plug all of the ports into that switch, you get the same exact performance as if you had one router with 10 ports, because that nobody makes. Nobody makes most like your Ubiquiti high-end router is probably has what, two or three ports on it.
In essence, it's got one, because the 2 ports are not switched, so they're for separate networks. So it has one basically, and you're intended to connect that to a switch. Speaking of Ubiquiti, so my I know this is not practical for everybody, but my inclination when I hear this question is like, go enterprise, like get something heavy duty, because consumer routers are all crap. They're way too slow for what you're paying. But I know that is just not realistic for most people to deal with, because they're such a pain to administrate. Is there a happy, I guess that's the real question, is like, is there a happy medium between like a cheapo like low end Netgear and like your Ubiquities or like a custom PF Sense box? Like what's the sweet spot for like usability and also horsepower, especially with gigabit? Like now that we have actual gigabit connections out there, like you need something that can handle that kind of traffic.
I was going to ask, like, is everyone also just going like mesh for everything now, or is there still like value in not and just getting like a standalone router, non-meshed kind of system?
I mean, so I wired, when I bought my house, I ran Ethernet to every room, a couple places in some rooms. I still use the mesh networks because it makes the coverage, solving the coverage problem easy. You know, I have 1,000 square foot house. It's not a big house. And we're one story, like everything fits. Theoretically, this should be a perfect house for putting a single router in the middle. And when you do that, then there's no coverage where at my part of the bed, in the bedroom, and on the toilet. So, you know, we had to add multiple access points to solve these very important problems for me. I feel like buying the mesh networks is the way to go. The one thing I would say is that I did learn recently that the Eero one, which we've recommended in the past, doesn't actually work when the internet's down. Like if the power goes out and your internet doesn't come back up, it has to download the configuration from the internet. I think that's something they're working on addressing, but it can't mesh. So you'll lose local network, which for most people probably doesn't matter if the internet itself is down. But if you care about that, it's something you should know. I have the Google Home routers, the Google Wi-Fi routers here, and they're fine. They're not the best, they're not the worst. But I have 2 of them set up, so I have total coverage over the entire house in the areas that we use.
I think we've talked about the Netgear Orbi is one, and like Ubiquity has a mesh line. Like one of those high end mesh kind of all in one solutions is if you don't want to administrate a router for like an hour a day, then that's probably the way to go.
Yeah, I have the Amplify Ubiquity one, and I like the most useful feature is the channel switching for the wireless. The automatic channel switching, because I live in like a really dense location where there's 40 networks visible from my couch.
Next question comes from Ben. Ben says, I have a relatively simple question that I couldn't find a helpful answer for during your free NAS episode. You guys, this is the NAS question you were dying for, Kishore.
You asked for it.
You guys mentioned backing up your drives and testing said backup, but never spelled out what your own backup process was. Is this literally just plugging in an external volume every so often and running some sort of rsync? I'm planning on having 8 terabytes of usable storage. That might mean that I just have to have an external 8 terabyte drive too, right? So yeah, and that is basically what I do. I have a 10 terabyte external drive that I plug into my NAS box. I back up the important stuff to a cloud service, Dropbox, which I pay for to get a couple terabytes of storage. And then like the mass files, like my media collection, goes on that 10 terabyte drive. And I just like, I add new things to that infrequently enough that if I have to rip an extra 5 or 10 disks, it's no big deal. And then when the drive is unplugged, it goes into a fire safe in my office. So
I am planning to do exactly what you do. I've got some USB drives that I bought last July that I haven't actually fully set that whole thing up yet. But I wanted to add to that generally in like a RAID situation that you don't want to be relying on USB drives as a primary pool.
Right.
Like they're fine for a removable backup for something you're just dumping data onto that you already have a primary copy of. But don't try to like RAID USB drives as your primary thing itself. That's not a great idea.
Go ahead, Keish.
I have a question that I wanted to ask Brad if we're done with the NAS backup.
Yeah, sure.
This is like really specific. So Brad, I have a Dell 2405 FPW monitor that I bought in 2005.
Okay. Yes.
Should I upgrade it?
A lot of the hands-on experience with this issue, it turns out. I could tell you having temporarily acquired some better monitors from work during this work from home scenario, that you should throw that thing in the dumpster and move on with your life.
But it's like an LCD monitor that carries so many memories for me.
Don't you donate it to, give it to a library or somebody that could use it. I mean, I've been trying to think about what to do with mine in the eventuality that I get something better on a permanent basis.
I think that can be a backer reward video. When we hit 1,000, when we hit 500 backers or 1,000 backers, we'll take those monitors out and we'll donate them with some
Did I-
baseball bats.
Did I mention the thing that has blown my mind the most about having these modern monitors here while we're doing work from home, which is that they are like maybe a tenth of the weight of those things?
Oh yeah.
Like you can hold one under each arm and just like do jumping jacks. Like that's insane. Like it feels like a piece of paper. Like those old monitors must weigh 10, 15 pounds each.
Well, there's no tubes and the glass. There's not that much glass.
No, I know these things are just like plastic and LEDs at this point, right? Like there's hardly anything in there.
I still have a dual monitor set up with that old monitor. And so one side is like a monitor I bought 2 years ago that weighs nothing. And the other side is this one. So the entire like arm like tilts to one side because of the weight distribution.
Like this is my problem if and when I decide to get a new monitor, I have to buy two of them because I can't abide that exact situation.
I made a bad monitor decision since we did this last time, and I turned a 34-inch ultra wide into portrait orientation.
Yeah, it's magical.
Why would you do that?
I've seen the picture.
Look, it's complicated. It's very tall. I think we talked about it last week. Maybe we did talk about it last week. I can't remember.
And the scroll is for phones, not for widescreen monitors.
The whole internet on there.
If you want to be able to read, if you want to be able to read the entire last hour of your Twitch chat all at once, then.
Yeah, that sounds great.
There you go.
Let's see. I got a question from Liz. This is actually more of a comment. My name is Liz. I'm from Bo Peep, Australia, which is my favorite place name we've gotten so far.
I looked that up. That is, in fact, a real municipality.
That's amazing. I listened to your emergency kit episode a number of times and just wanted to make a couple of suggestions. I'm the community safety coordinator for my local fire brigade, with a large part of my role being the education of locals to prepare them for fires. As an Aussie, our emergency kits tend to be more aimed at bushfires and cyclones if you live up north, so I have a couple of suggestions for people who live in fire zones. Firstly, a car-specific kit is a lifesaver, and specifically having woolen blankets is a must. If you are caught in a fire, a woolen blanket, unlike a sleeping bag, will protect you from radiant heat while laying down in the footwells of your car and is less likely to melt like the synthetics found in a sleeping bag. The radiant heat and smoke will kill you before the flames in many cases. The other suggestions for people to have local emergency warning apps on their smart devices. This was one of the technological developments to come as a result of the Black Saturday fires, which occurred over here in 2009. And so that local app thing is incredibly important.
Do we have that? What is our infrastructure like for that?
So we have some for we have Quake Alert, which is the earthquake early warning system that uses the difference between the speed of light and the conduction of seismic waves through the rock, is my understanding. I could be wrong.
That's right. You can get up to 10 seconds early warning.
Wow.
That's enough time to tell you to put pants on, which is all I'm looking for. And then the other, in my experience in the US, and this could be wrong, is that most of the early warning and emergency stuff is by signing up for a text on your phone, not necessarily a dedicated app. So like I'm signed up for the San Mateo, San Francisco, and San Mateo Police, San Mateo Sheriff, and San Francisco Police. And they have if you go to your local police department's website, they will have emergency alert services that you can sign up for, is my experience. Or try the fire department if you don't. And if you don't get that, you can call 311 and the non-emergency line, and somebody there will be able to help you probably. So.
Can I ask a quick question about this? What are the mechanics, if you know, of the woolen blanket protecting you from radiant heat? Do you have any idea why that is the case?
It's because it insulates. So it's insulators work both ways. They keep you warm. They keep the heat in. They keep the heat out. The emergency fire, the foldy metallized plastic blankets, the Mylar ones, probably melt in extreme heat, would be my guess, is why you use a woolen blanket instead of one of those.
Okay.
But yeah,
so specifically it's the insulating property.
Yeah. They're also, those Mylar things are really bad if you run into electrical lines too.
Oh God. I didn't even think about that.
That's a Mylar electrical line joke. No.
Yeah. That's wow.
That's a deep cut for like helium balloons hitting electrical lines.
That's the daddest of dad jokes today.
I will shout out like on this emergency response in San Francisco, they have neighborhood emergency response training units. So like each neighborhood has somebody that's in charge that does like neighborhood specific training for how to deal with stuff. So like in the case, it's mostly related to earthquakes, but the training itself is really excellent. It gives you a lot of like very specific technique, knowledge and techniques and and stuff like they even demonstrate how to do gas shutoff in the case of an earthquake. It's great.
One of the other things I've learned about recently that's really, really useful, especially in a place where we are now, where a lot of people can't leave their houses, especially if they're, older, immune compromised or whatever. There's a lot of mutual aid groups set up especially in major urban areas where people who are healthy can go out and, pick up groceries for your. So if you have a family member someplace that they can't get groceries themselves and need help, definitely check out the mutual aid groups in their regions. And I've heard some incredible stories about those folks helping people's parents and friends and whatever. So
I'll be quick about this. Like, I'm part of one of those that was like flyering the Sunset neighborhood that I live in. We got a cease and desist letter from the USPS about putting flyers in people's mailboxes.
Oh, man. Well, you don't mess with the post office, I guess.
Federal crime, baby.
Wow. You're going to do good in the big house, Quiche.
You're a safety bandit.
Severy says, suppose I wanted to get a gaming PC on a not crazy budget and optimized for performance per watt. How should I go about doing this? PC part picker? Would laptops be a good choice? Is underclocking a thing useful? Should I go with Intel or AMD or NVIDIA? What do? I don't know. This is a question I have never considered before.
Yeah, I mean, if you were trying to maybe build some kind of home theater PC that you wanted to be quiet, or something that fits in a tiny enclosure, maybe I could see some use cases for this.
Oh, I think I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Like people who live on a solar, if you're living purely on solar, and you want to be able to charge your battery during the day, and you need to get X amount number of watts to be able to play games at night. There is actually, in fact, there's even a movement toward fanless PCs now. Have you seen this? Like, there are a couple of companies that are starting to try to design toward a fan, like the goal of a PC without any active cooling. That's bonkers.
Yeah, I agree, but more power to them. Anyway,
so PC part picker it lists watts in terms of the TDP and the power draw for a power supply, which is probably a good place to start. My guess is that your best bet is going to be a laptop, and you can figure out how many watts you're going to draw by looking at the power brick that it provides, because that's going to give you an upper limit on how much power you're going to pull. The laptop's going to have mobile GPUs and mobile CPUs, which means they'll be much more power efficient than their desktop counterparts. And you're probably going to want to look at 1080p panels so that you're not running. The higher resolution run, the more pixels you have to draw, the more calculations have to happen, and the more energy you're going to use, and the more heat you're going to generate. So that's the quick and dirty answer. This is one where I'd love, if people have expertise in this, I would love to get more feedback, and you can post it on the Discord or send an email, and we'll pass it along in a future episode.
Yeah.
Here's a good one. Jean-Andre says, I have a question. Over the years, I've collected a good portion of DVDs and Blu-rays. I would like to throw everything on a hard drive and be able to access it from all my devices. Do you have a good solution for this? Yes. I have learned of a new piece of software to make this process a lot easier.
Oh, yeah, because last time we talked about the kind of manual process of having to rip discs and eyeball tracks and like match things up, and it's a lot.
So make MKV /Handbrake is what we recommended last time. There's a piece of software that my friend Rick introduced to me the other day called Automatic Ripping Machine, and it's basically
sounds like a heavy metal band.
It does heavy metal business. It's a Linux distro that is tuned to basically do automated ripping of discs. So you set it up, you give it the settings you want it to rip at, and then you just plop discs in, and it eats them, and it turns them into MKV files for you in whatever compression you want, whatever settings you want, whatever extras you want pulled off, and it'll do all that seamlessly. Now, there's an old XKCD about the perils of automating things, and then like having a new thing that you have to futz with to keep working because the automation's always breaking. And this very much hits that category. I haven't spent any time at all with it yet, but it's on my list of things to do during the quarantine. And I'll report back in when we have more data. But it's called Automatic Ripping Machine is the name of the distro. I think that's it. Do you want to do one question about VR?
Sure.
Okay. Paul Foged asks, it seems like you know a bit about VR and VR headsets, but you haven't talked about it much. With Alex coming out, I have to get a VR headset, and I'm thinking on which one to buy, and I'm even considering waiting for the next generation. The Quest is really cool. I love its ability to play without a PC, but I've had a chance to use it for hours, and everything began to hurt. If I can do serious work with my company on the headset, I can, get it much cheaper, but I'm afraid that none of the headsets are light enough for extended use. Should I wait for the next generation? Should I buy now? Are headsets ever going to be good enough to just feel like a big screen for work or movie watching? And that's it. Are any of the current headsets comfortable enough for extended use? They all look really big.
Is there any expectation of a quote unquote next generation of headsets? Like, kind of feel like we're at the point where stuff has plateaued a little bit and they're sort of letting the market populate a little more.
It's a slower product cycle.
It's hard to imagine there are a bunch of radically more advanced headsets on the cusp of coming out in the next 12, 18 months.
I think we're going to see continued incremental improvements. Like the next big thing is probably eye tracking inside the headset, so we can do foveated rendering, which what that means is that they focus a lot of the computational power that does the rendering, so we get really, really, really high fidelity in a really, really small area that is the part of the screen that your eye is actually looking at and is able to see high detail in, rather than doing high detail in the entire headset. I think that's a little ways off. We might see that on Quest, on the mobile headsets first, because I think they're going to probably iterate faster than we have seen on the desktop headsets so far. If you look at the current product cycle, Oculus and HTC both launched in 2016, and then last year they rolled out new versions of both of their headsets, and Valve launched the Index. It remains to be seen how long Facebook is going to keep the Quest as the mobile standalone headset design. I don't think it's going to be an annual upgrade for that, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's in every 2 years versus every 4 years or 3 years. The other thing that is interesting, he asked about comfort and ability to wear these for extended periods of time. The headsets that have hard straps, so the PSVR, the Vive Pro, the original Vive with the Pro audio strap, the Index, the Rift S, and I guess the original Rift, and the Quest, all distribute the weight really evenly across your entire head. The early headsets that had elastic straps that you wore like a pair of ski goggles are really uncomfortable over long sessions. And the mobile headsets like the Quest, where almost all of the weight of the battery and the electronics in the screen, everything is concentrated in the front, are pretty uncomfortable for extended sessions in my experience. If you think you're going to use a headset for 8 or 9 hours a day, you're going to want something that is evenly balanced and that moves more of the weight to the back of the headset, so your head's not just constantly being pulled down.
I did the FrankenQuest mod on my Quest, and before it, I couldn't watch Netflix and other media in it for more than 45 minutes. But now I feel like I could do something for a couple of hours.
The FrankenQuest, just so people know, is when you take a Vive Pro audio strap and Velcro and duct tape it or zip tie it to your Quest. It's great. I did it for mine. It makes it much, much more comfortable.
Yeah, not duct tape. Come on. I'm a modern professional here. Zip ties all the way. I saw Steam release that there was something like 40,000 concurrent users playing Half-Life Alyx the other day. The day it came out. Do you think those numbers are big enough to start to move us towards discussion of a next generation headset? Or is it are we a factor even more users away?
I mean, it's hard to say because they charge $60 for Alyx, right? If you didn't have an Index, right?
Yes.
So I think that's probably more indicative of the number of Index users there are, maybe than the broader VR headset market. I'm really interested in seeing the Steam hardware survey next when they show how many Quest users have hooked up a link cable. They're still gated on supply on those. The bad Anker cable that works is shipping in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. The Oculus Link cable, the fiber optic one that's really comfortable and 5 meters long, is currently listed as not available in the US. So, there's still kind of supply problems and things like that. I mean, I think we're going to continue to see constant iteration in the designs for all of the headsets. HTC rolled out the Cosmos Elite just a month ago. I think. I mean, it was probably 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, but it feels like about a year. So I really, it's really hard to say. I think the next big headset that's going to be released is probably the one that goes with the PS5, but that's probably more than a year away, if I had to guess.
Any expectations with that thing in terms of, I don't know, tracking, like wirelessness, potentially, any of that stuff?
Well, so wireless is tough. My guess is that it doesn't, the existing headset's pretty good. The big problem they have is the controllers.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if they just up-res the headset, maybe add some build in some speakers, some headphones, and roll out like hand controllers that are more analogous to the Index controllers or Oculus Touch. You
don't think they'll do something to replace that kind of camera-based optical tracking? Like that's never been quite stable for me.
My guess is that they'll do multiple cameras, like and probably they'll do inside out. Right now they're doing outside in tracking. My guess is they switch to inside out. That seems to be the way the industry's moving.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a bunch of Windows mixed reality headsets on the market for like barely over $200 that have inside out tracking now. So
I don't know if Microsoft subsidizes those, but I would guess that they probably did.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess that'll do it for us today.
Cool.
Kishore, thank you so much for coming by and podcasting with us, answering a bunch of coronavirus questions.
Yeah, really appreciate your knowledge.
Hopefully it is accurate. I'll start there.
Hopefully it's still accurate in 4 days. Yeah,
exactly. Thanks for having me on. I love this podcast. I want to encourage people to go to your Patreon, I think as Will pronounced it.
Damn it. I guess that's what we're going with. I don't know.
I changed Patreon. It's a Patreon.
Okay. All right. Glad we're all about standards here. We've standardized on this now. So
I love that Kishore comes on the show and plugs our podcast when I was giving him an opportunity to plug something. But you can find him on This Is Only a Test on the reg. He's a longtime contributor to Tested and a dear friend. And the Patreon is at patreon.com/techpod.
Yeah.
It's the end of the month, which means we have an important job, Brad.
Oh?
We have to thank our patrons.
Yes.
Starting with David Allen, who's our executive producer.
Executive producer. That's right.
Thanks, David. We have a handful of associate producers now. We have Iain Baillie, Graham Banks, Sam Buck, Ezekiel Holiman, Paul Reust, and Thomas Shea. Thank you all so much for supporting the podcast. And,
yes, thank you.
Supporting the Patreon. If you would like to learn how to support the podcast, you can go to Patreon. I hope you all are happy.com/techpod. And we will keep doing this show. It's been a lot of fun. And thank you all for your support.
Just real quick thank you to everybody who's been hanging out in the Discord also. Like the amount of expertise and knowledge and general range of topics that are covered by people in there has just blown me away so far. Like
we've added a few more channels since the last time we talked about this. We added a Mister and other emulation channel because somebody on the pod is getting ready to make a Mister.
Yep.
And then it turns out we have a lot of musicians. We had to add a music creation channel because they were spamming up the general chat so much that it was nice. It's a good place to have lovely conversations. And
yeah, like if you want to see an in-depth conversation between musicians talking about like configuring FPGAs to act as like digital signal processors and stuff like that, then this is the Discord for you. I've really enjoyed it.
It's a lovely community. It's growing really at a lovely pace. And like I think we're gonna probably have to open a food channel soon if I had to guess. There's a lot of home automation talk happening today, so if you want to go in and nerd out with some really smart people, it's a good place to go. And I think the tier for that is like $2 a month, so anybody can hop in, and guests get it for free, Keish. So we'll send you an invite in a little bit.
Oh, awesome. Because I think I'm going to start a what to do with my heavy old monitor chat.
They will have some ideas.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much, Kishore, for coming by. And we will see you all next week. We go plant some leeks in Animal Crossing.